Thank you all for being here. We will bring this meeting of the Philomath City Council to order. It is 7:08 p.m. on March 10th, 2025, and we'll start with a roll call.
Jessica Andrade.
Present.
Spencer Irwin.
Present.
Brent Caseman.
Present.
Richard Salsa.
Present.
Risa Nielsen.
Here.
Christopher McCorn.
Present. Thank you very much. Then, if there's no objection from the council, we'd like to move item G to the top of the agenda, the review of our 2023-2024 audit report. Since we have our auditor sitting here right now, and we don't believe we have anyone signed up for public comment, but we'll keep waiting. So, is there any objection to that? Okay, then we'll go ahead and move into new business, the review of the 2023-2024 audit report for the city, and I will again turn it over to our finance director.
Tonight, I have with me the partner in charge of Senior Leewak. He's our auditor. He's the partner in charge. This is Brad Greenheimer, and he will present to you the city financial report for 2023. 23-24. We're working at 2 years. I was getting confused. Anyway, turn it over to Brad. It's all yours.
Well, thank you for having me tonight. We appreciate the opportunity to serve as the city's auditor, and we certainly enjoy having a good relationship so far with the city and look forward to that continuing. I'll give you a little bit of background about us. So our firm, as auditors, prior to about 4.5 years ago, we were the firm of Bolt, Carlisle & Smith in Oregon, which had about a 50-year history of auditing local governments in Oregon. 4.5 years ago, we just made the decision to merge in with a larger firm, Singer Leewak. Singer Leewak has total staff of about 500. We have offices throughout Southern California, the Bay Area, Oregon, Bremerton, Washington, Denver, Colorado, Honolulu, Hawaii, Las Vegas, Atlanta, Georgia, and Houston currently. So, good-sized organization. And yes, I am the partner in charge of the government sector, so I'm responsible for all the government audits of the firm. And I, personally, I've been doing this. I started my career with Bolt, Carlisle & Smith, and that was in January of 1986 I started. I don't want to count how many years that means that we're doing this. Anyways, so yeah, and kind of want to give you then, that's kind of background, and then, what we do as auditors. So when we come in to do an audit, the first thing we do is gain an understanding of the organization. Who the people are, what types of, what software you have, what systems you have in place, gain an understanding of your internal controls, take a preliminary look at your financial information, and from there, we develop an audit plan. And part of that plan is, we look at, as I said, internal controls. Sometimes we'll say, well, we can rely upon internal controls, so we'll test those internal controls. They'll make it so we don't necessarily have to do as much other testing. Or we might just say, if we want to go ahead and test all the, the significant account balances and dive into the details of transactions, that kind of thing. So we do that. We go through, I'm sure Mike will attest, we ask 1,001 annoying questions and ask for 100 different documents just to, understand what's going on and verify that the financial information presented in the financial reports is correct and in compliance with generally accepted accounting principles. Governmental generally accepted accounting principles are quite different than those for businesses. This is a specialty area. I usually tell people, a governmental financial statement is much more complex than most businesses. For example, Philomath is not a very large city, and yet your audit report is 64 pages long. So there's a lot of information there. I'm going to go over some highlights of it. and then offer the opportunity to ask me any questions you might have. So, once again, you've engaged us to, give an opinion on the financial statements. And so we have done that. We've issued a report which, in a nutshell, says, in our opinion, the financial statements present fairly, in all material respects, the financial position or result of operations of the city of Philomath for the year ended June 30, 2022. So where did the city end up in its financials? So the financial statements start out with the government-wide statements, which are very high-level aggregated, that they give kind of a good overview of what's happening in the city. And those are broken down between what are called governmental activities and business-type activities. The governmental activities are basically those things supported by property taxes, grants, and those types of revenues, whereas the business-type activities, that's basically your water, sewer, storm, where there's more of an exchange-type transaction going on. So the governmental activities ended the year with a net position of $23 million, which is an increase of $1.7 million. The business type activities ended the year with a net position of $20.1 million, which was an increase of $3.5 million. And these are the types of things that we like to see. We like to see, small increases in those net positions. That's an indication of, at least maintaining financial health. And obviously, as inflation occurs, those should go up. But, as they're basically just keeping up with inflation, that's kind of what we like to see. That means you're maintaining good financial health. When we start to see negative trends for a number of years, that's when we begin to have some concerns. So the total expenses of the governmental activities was $5.2 million. And the business type activities had total expenses of $2.7 million. Now, how those expenses were paid for, of course, were with revenues. So the total revenues of the governmental activities was $9.1 million. Some more significant items in that those revenues, property taxes made up of about 1/3 of it at $3.1 million. You did have very significant park grant this last year of $1.9 million. And then from there, the highway funds, monies that you get basically from the state of Oregon for either highways or transportation, that represented about another $700,000 of revenue. Interest on your money that you have on deposit with either this financial institutions or the state local government investment bureau. Interest earnings were $694,000. Franchises were $595,000. And then the other one as SDCs of $549,000 in the governmental activities. In looking at the business activities, they had total revenues of $4.1 million, and that was water had $1.5 million, sewer had $1.6 million, storm had a very meager $100,000, and then there again the next highest source of revenue for business activities were SDC funds of $666,000. So in looking at, like I said, that's very high level information. So when we look at individual funds, of course, the most important fund for the city is the general fund. And that's where most of your stuff happens. That's where, the bulk of your property taxes go. And so your general fund ended the year with a fund balance of $1.9 million. And that had a very small decrease of $168,000. Those things, it will fluctuate up and down. Like I said, once again, we don't want to see large decrease. Now, one of the things that has a very significant impact on the city's net position is something that you basically have no control over, okay? And that's the net pension liability that represents a liability based upon the city's participation in Oregon PERS. To give you, what that is. So this year, for the year ended June 30, 2024, the city's net pension liability that's reported is a total of $2.6 million. And that was an increase of $705,000 from the year before. And those have directly a negative effect on your net position. And of course, like I said, you have you have almost no control over this. These numbers are provided basically to us from the state of Oregon. The Oregon PERS every year goes through its own audit, as well as an actuarial valuation. If you think accounts are boring, well, you should talk to an actuary. But essentially, they look at in terms of, they have these future cash outflows to retirees, and they basically, have to project that out using all types of demographic information. Then they take those projected outflows, bring it back to a present value at a point in time, and then compare that number to the value of the assets held by PERS at that same point in time. The measurement for this in your financial statements is always going to be 12 years in arrears. Because it takes, if we were waiting for PERS, we wouldn't get these reports out very quickly because they have to get their stuff done. So essentially, and that's allowed under generally accepted accounting principles to use up to 1 year prior. So, like I said, that's how they develop this. And of course, I always tell people, like I said, that has a very negative impact on your net position. But what is important also to note is, what is the city contributing to PERS? And so in the financials, in the document, there is actually a schedule of historical contribution percentages on page 48. And you'll see that basically, the city has every year basically contributed right around, don't know now a little bit, but right around 15% of PERS covered compensation. And actually, I'm going to say that's less than we see in many other small cities. Many of them are up to 20 or 25%. So your PERS rate is a little lower. And part of that is due to the fact that you have fewer employees in PERS. So anyways, I do like to point out that, like I said, it does have very significant impact on the financial statements, but you have very little control over it. So in addition to our report on the financial statements themselves, we also issue a separate report under the requirements of the minimum standards for audits of municipal corporations. And this report requires us to look at basically two areas. First, compliance with specific Oregon laws and regulations. And so there's a laundry list of those that we're required to test. We perform those tests, and if we find anything, we report to you. We did note some things where there were some violations of those, and they all related to budgets. Right. And what it is, so you have two things. In the budget document itself every year, if you ever looked at detail, you have on the left-hand side, you'll have these two columns for historical information. And as auditors, we say, well, we need to know if this information is correct. So we look at that, compare that to prior audited financial statements, and the budget to action comparisons in those financial statements. And if those don't line up well, it means that that historical information is not quite correct. So we do have some variances there. They're outlined in a report on page 63 as we're following along. This is one of the most common things we find in compliance is, that the historical information doesn't match. So it's not unexpected. Like I said, it's one of the most common things we find. And then also on that same page, there were a few items that you had expenditures in excess of appropriations. In the general fund, in the police and city council, you had some over expenditures of appropriations, those two categories. And then in the urban renewal and also the sewer fund, you had debt service that you didn't have an appropriation for. Those are required to be separately appropriated under Oregon budget law. There was no appropriation, so the amount of expenditure of those is a violation of Oregon budget law. So the other part of that report briefly touches upon internal controls. As I said before, as part of every audit, we come in and gain them the internal controls. Helps us, plan our audit. And as a byproduct, if we identify anything that we think deserves your attention, we bring that forth to you, and we bring that forth to you actually in a separate document. So that, along with the audit, there is a separate letter that talks about internal control matters. And in this, we noted two things. We did note that in the looking at this year, there were errors in the beginning balances related to errors that were in the prior financial statements that we did not audit. But we did audit first the beginning balances, and we did note there were errors. And whenever we see material errors that we have to propose adjustments for, that's indication to us that there's a deficiency in internal controls. The idea of internal controls are supposed to prevent and detect and correct material misstatements on a timely manner. We're coming in a year later and we're finding these things. That indicates to us that there's something. So we've talked to management about this and talked about how we can avoid those things in the future, mainly by us providing good information to Mike about the amounts in the financial statements, looking at all the detail and how they roll up. Make sure that everybody's in agreement that these are correct. So there's that. And then the other one that we note in here is one which is also one of the most common ones we give, which is a lack of segregation of duty, particularly for small organizations. You just don't have enough people to split everything up, to say we have good segregation of duties and everything. So, it's like I said, it's the most common one we give for small entities is that you just don't have it. So there is usually some area where segregation of duties just isn't what we would like it to be. Of course, we as auditors, we always worry about what could happen, not what has happened. And nothing bad has happened. It's just that, the internal controls could be better. Of course, if you ask an auditor, internal controls can never be too good. But of course, in order to make them that good, you wouldn't be able to get anything done and be very expensive. So there's a cost-benefit there analysis that management has to do to decide what's worth fixing and what's not. So that's basically our audit in a nutshell. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to try and answer them.
Thank you very much, Councilor Andrade.
I remember there being some internal control issues pointed out last year. Are those the same ones, or did we make some improvements to them, and then there just are some additional ones that were found that needed to be?
The one that he's really referring to is one that's new to us. It has to do with our utility billing clerk. She gets the checks, she puts them into the system, applies the system, and she prepares the deposit. So we need to separate that.
Gotcha.
And, I sat down with my staff and said, can we do this any better? And we just don't have the staff to do it. So we've got it built so we're okay with it. We could make some improvements to it, but it'll take my time to do it. And it's like, okay, where can I put that in the list of things to do? So,
Yeah.
but otherwise, no, nothing new. I mean, a lot of this stuff that he found, I know how to fix it quickly, and kind of irritates me that they came through on it, but it didn't. I missed it. I mean, and I caught it this year, and I went, okay, I'm going to fix that all the way back. Joan put everything into the system from the audits. I never did. Adjusting GASB entries, GASB 34 entries, as I call them, they call them full accrual or gap or whatever. I know them as GASB 34. And I always did them off books. And so when you put them in here, the 14th period comes through. So like I said, I know how to fix that. But nothing new besides that one.
Yeah, I had remembered specifically an internal controls thing, and so I didn't remember what the specifics were, and just wanted to make sure that it wasn't the same, or that if it was, there was a good reason for it.
We just don't have the staff.
Yeah.
I mean, we go by I tell my staff we go by faith, but, you know, there's a lot of controls there that, you know, to rip the city off, you really have to have 3 or 4 people to do it, and it's not gonna happen. So, it's. Yeah, thank you, Chris. Yes, yeah. Anyway. I hope that
Cool.
answers your
Oh,
question.
yeah, thank you.
I guess just on a broader sense, what do we think happened with the differences between the budgeted amounts and the audited statements? Like, where do we think those differences came from?
The 2 days prior.
I think it's the difference between what the actual.
Yeah,
Yeah, well, those right there, that's exactly what I was talking about. They give me journal entries, we roll up, when we pull the assets and roll the financials, we true up the principal, so we bring it from the expense up to the balance sheet. And when you do that, it pulls it out of your income statement. I missed that. That's this right there is the income statement. So I need to go in there and pull that journal entry out. It's a 34 entry. I just need to reverse that and pull it back. Or I can do it on paper. It's kind of convoluted.
I have no doubt that was accurate. I also don't know what you just said.
I think that so if you want to look at page 44 of the financial statement for the general fund budget actual comparison, to give you some, context to, those over expenditures that were noted. So in the, the police department, the total budget was 1.7 million. And your actual was just a little above that, 1,733,000. So, as a percent, that's pretty small. Yeah, that's, an error, that's just, and, of course, the easy way to prevent those is to have a resolution.
Right,
transferring appropriation from contingency.
Right.
And likewise on city council, there's just more there in the actual than was expected.
Okay, so it's just that we accidentally spent a little bit more than we thought without a resolution? Or?
Yeah, well,
Okay.
the police, we had 2 chiefs going at that time.
And that's true.
And then on the city council, I made an adjustment and missed that.
Okay.
When I moved money from the ARPA money from the budget to the LBE, I forgot that you'd already you had spent your whole budget.
Okay. So in the future, we would just need to do the resolution.
Yeah, well, we did the resolution, but the chiefs, the 2 chiefs, I couldn't do anything about that. I
Okay.
thought I got it, but I didn't do it all.
Yes, Councilor
So
Salzman.
just to make this as a point, you're at the source of what the audit showed. That is, what happened and where it happened.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay, good. That's kind of the bottom line here, is that we know where it happened, the controls that in the ideal world would be put into place to prevent that from happening. And there may be some engineering involved to prevent it from happening again. Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Any other questions? Words from staff?
I appreciate the auditor coming on board, and working through this. Again, we've been through a little bit of transition and had an auditor on loan for a little bit there, and so I'm just grateful, again, for the audit report and for future relationships. I think next year will go a little, I'll say smooth. I think it went fairly smooth this year as well, but, now they've got a year behind their back with Willamette as a customer or client, and going forward, he'll come back next year and be able to kind of explain things again, and we can talk specifically about what we see last year, what we see this year, and if there's trends or repeat offense type things, we can look through that. So overall, I'm really pleased. But the only thing that scares me more than a report where everybody's really, really excited as a report where it's sold, oh, that like, oh, we didn't find anything. You know, if the auditor doesn't find anything, I'm worried, right? Because the auditors, you know, look under every stone and identify that there are areas where we could ideally separate powers a little bit more and do this a little more, that we have some constraints, identify some things in ending fund balances that didn't carry through or weren't, you know, identified correctly. I mean, it's a solid report, tells me the audit, we're in good hands with the auditor, and you should have a lot of faith, to use Mike's word, that our auditors do a good job for us. So appreciate it. Obviously, things that we can do to improve, make sure the numbers are a little bit better reflective of where we're at. But overall, as far as condition of the city goes, financially, we're in great shape there as well. Mike's doing a great job for us, taking care of all this, and I think the audit reflects that. So good job, Mike, and thank you both of you.
And I want to say thank you to the city staff and Mike's staff in particular, because we come in, we're very disruptive. You have a lot of work to do on a day-to-day basis. We come in and we're very disruptive. You know, we ask for a lot of stuff. But the city staff was great, giving us the information we needed so we could do our job. So I do appreciate that immensely, knowing that we are a big disruption to what they do on a regular basis.
Thank you very much. I was just gonna ask one final question since we do have our city attorney. So obviously, I trust we will, you know, work on these issues in the future. What is the consequence of violating budget law like that? Is there anything?
I don't specialize in finance,
Sure.
you know, finance related law,
Okay.
but I can definitely research that for you or
Okay.
bring you back a
Well,
response. And I'm sure they can also speak to that as well.
Specialize in
Yeah. Because under local budget law, you know, I after doing this since 1986, I can honestly say I've never seen it come into play. But essentially, you know, the law says that, you know, a city can't make legal expenditures without complying with local budget law. So any amounts over appropriations is a violation of local budget law. And public officials can be held responsible for those over expenditures. In all my years of doing this, I have never seen that happen. Most of the time, the worst thing that's going to happen, you'll get a letter from the Secretary of State's office saying, don't do that anymore. That's it. Yeah,
There you go.
and that's their job, because they monitor, you know, the financial statements that are submitted to them. And I know the person at the Secretary of State's office quite well, Amy John. I know her quite well. We work together on various projects, and you know that is her job to make sure that, you know, it's communicated to cities. You know, make sure you're doing things right.
Yep, great. Any final
Appreciate
questions?
the reassurance there.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you very much. Thank you for
Thank
your
you for
work.
having me tonight. I appreciate the time.
Oh, well, we have not, but I was just, yeah. There is a motion in the packet if someone would like to make it. Salsa,
I move to accept and approve the 2023-2024 financial audit and related reports.
is there a second on that?
Sure. I'll second.
It's been moved by Counselor Salsa, seconded by Counselor Irwin to accept and approve the 2023-2024 financial and related reports. Is there any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, would all those in favor please raise your hand and say aye? Aye. And that passes unanimously. Thank you again. And that will revert to our regularly scheduled programming. So first, so we'll go back to item B on the agenda. First proclamation is the proclamation of Women's History Month. So we usually, well, not, Chris and I had a discussion about whether you're supposed to, read the proclamation and then vote on it, or talk about the proclamation and approve it and then read it. So we decided we're gonna talk about it, vote on it, talk about it, do any amendments or discussion, then I'll read it, or someone will read it, then do a final vote to approve the version we just read. I hope, and you know what? and this is an open process. If this doesn't go well, we'll make a note for next time. So that being said, we have a proclamation before you, and I think just for some context, what we've started doing with proclamations is if it's a proclamation like this that is an annual thing, we usually just kind of re-up the one from last year. For certain proclamations, those will go back through the inclusivity committee. For things like this, where it's like about a certain identity group or something, that goes to the inclusivity committee. The things like the library week proclamation, that didn't go through the inclusivity committee, but and then sometimes they'll make little tweaks, just if, you know, like if the theme of Women's History Month last year was something and it's a different thing this year, they might change that. But for the most part, they're not like rewriting this every year anymore, which is nice to not have to do that anymore. So, is there any discussion or thoughts on the proclamation?
This be the time for recommendations? No.
You're certainly welcome.
Is this, I was trying to follow the pattern.
Yes. Counselor
And
Casey.
so, just to be very precise, I did make some notes, so perhaps I'll just read that as I have it. I support the celebration of women in history and their indispensable role in the world and in our community of Philomath. If the goal of the proclamation is to voice this support and celebration of women in history, I recommend that it focus on women and that presentations or discussions about gender expression and other gender ideologies be assigned to other proclamations or platforms. I spoke with my favorite woman in the world, my wife, for her feedback on the proposed proclamation, and she agrees with that sentiment. For this reason, I recommend we revise or amend the proclamation to omit lines 16 through 19, which are those that talk about gender expression and related.
Thank you. I guess, do you want to make is that a motion? Or
Is that how I do it? Okay.
You are welcome to make a
Okay.
motion now, or someone could move to approve the entire proclamation, and then you could move to amend it in there. I don't think it makes a huge difference either way. So you're welcome to make an emotion now, or
To approve with this amendment, or to, I just want to make sure I do it.
it's up to you. You could move that we approve it with an amendment. You could just move to strike lines 16 through 19.
Okay, so maybe I'll move to strike lines 16 through 19 on the Women's History Month proclamation.
Okay. Is there a second on that motion? Okay, it's been moved by Counselor Caseman, seconded by Counselor Nielsen to strike lines 16 through 19 on resolution 2504. Is there any discussion on that motion? Counselor Andrade?
Assuming that there isn't any more to speak to on them.
Oh, no, that was it. That's okay.
I highly recommend that we do not remove these lines. It is very important that we do not further ostracize people who are already discriminated against. This is discriminatory, basically, to remove it, and I do not condone it.
Thank you. Any further discussion on that motion?
Frank, can I see that for a second, just to?
What I wrote?
Yeah.
And and just that, like, gender expansive people, like, are women if they identify as such. And saying otherwise is discriminatory regardless of intent.
Discussion, comments, questions? I guess I'll just say I appreciate thought that went into that, and I appreciate you talking to your favorite woman. I guess I just had one question in your statement. You talked about sort of I don't remember the exact words you used, but like expressions of gender or
Oh, I said gender expression and other gender ideologies.
yeah. I guess I was just curious because to me, a proclamation about Women's History Month is inherently about gender expression. I guess I was just curious sort of what your thoughts were on that.
But I would say it's about gender. I think gender expression could be a different thing. I guess we get into the definition of terms.
Oh, God.
I think if
I
we're
don't
talking
do that.
and neither do I. And I think some of this goes beyond local city government. So
Yeah.
it gets
yeah.
into definitions of things, but
Okay.
I was trying to be precise with how I.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to
No, I
understand.
appreciate that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think I would prefer to keep it just because I don't think it does any harm. And it may do some help. But I also think that I hope anyone who is a woman would appreciate this proclamation and know that it's about them. But yeah, I appreciate helping me understand that a little better. Any other discussion?
I feel like there's something, but I can't quite. Working on like about an hour of sleep right now. But I guess, it violates the spirit of the proclamation to remove those lines and of the inclusivity committee where this was drafted. Because the point is including people who are historically and continue to be like not included. And I think it's really important to recognize that cisgender women are not the only women and femme identifying people in existence, and I'm struggling to word, but
I think my final thought is just the fact that we've had that in there for the past, I don't know, 2 years, maybe I would say a couple.
we had a big discussion about
We
it
did,
at our
yeah,
last
yeah.
inclusivity.
Just, I think my only concern now is just, I feel like removing it now is like making a statement in the same way that if we added it now, it would be making a statement. But the fact that it's been in there, I would be in favor of just maintaining it as written, but that's just me. Yeah, Councilor Nielsen?
Well, and in conjunction with that is proclamations. I noticed in lines, let's see, where therefore be it resolved, we are the City Council and Inclusivity Committee of City of Philomath. The Inclusivity Committee being included in the proclamation itself feels, I guess, feels a bit questionable in that, yes, they're a committee that functions with our city, but they're not elected officials. And when we have a proclamation or resolution from the city, it seems like it should be resolved and therefore committed by those elected officials of the city rather than committee members. We don't do that with Parks and Rec. We don't do that with other types of committees that are part of our city. Yet we've included the Inclusivity Committee on this resolution, which for me feels awkward, like we're making exceptions for that. So I see your point about, I understand Jessica's point, Councilor Andrade's point about, and your point about changing something. But I do think that we have to be, as a woman, how we address the womanhood and how we identify womanhood is is a very intimate and personal matter, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. I think just for the purpose of this motion, I feel like it would be best to focus our discussion on lines 16 through 19. I think we could talk about whether or not proclamations should be proclaimed by a committee more in a separate discussion, but I appreciate that. City Manager?
I'm going back on my memory, so take that for what it is. But I do remember, and I believe it was just last year, Councilor Andrade, I'm kind of looking to you and the other members on the inclusivity committee. But I remember there was discussion at the time about the list, right? And what gets included in the list, what doesn't get included in the list. Do you get rid of the list and just go with the end statement to any one woman or girl identified? And my recollection at the committee, and I'm not necessarily stating, wrong or right or indifferent, but the conversation at the committee at that time was when you remove the specifics and you go very general, that's where it starts to feel like you're excluding individuals or categories, if you will, for lack of a better word. And to just go general and just say, this is for all women, and if you identify as woman or not is up to you, but we're just gonna remove all that language. At the time, the discussion on inclusivity and the sentiment on the inclusivity committee was, they thought it was important to list the different kind of, again, I don't know the categories is the right word, the different identities, or to list those gave power to those and showed that those have meaning and they have a place in this proclamation for Women's History Month. And the inclusivity committee felt that that was important. And so they all got listed, but then it was added, anyone, woman or girl identified, to make sure that if a identity got left off the list, that was hopefully comprehensive enough. So I do think the point would be, for Women's History Month proclamation, does the city council support this as for all women, including these specific identities and all women or girl identified, or does the council want to be more general and just say women, and if you identify as a woman and this has meaning for you, then it has meaning for you. So, but that's my recollection of the conversation from a year ago, that it was discussed to go general or go specific, and the inclusivity committee's recommendation of the council last year was to use the specifics, but then to be general so everybody was included. But those specifics were important to members of the inclusivity committee at the time.
Thank you for that.
I wish I had that good of a memory.
As soon as
Okay, well, any further questions, comments, discussion? Okay, then just as a reminder, we will be voting now on the motion to strike lines 16 through 19 from resolution 2504. Would all those in favor please raise your hand and say aye?
Aye.
Okay. Would all those opposed please raise your hand and say aye?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, the motion fails, how do I say that? 5-1, I won 5, okay, 5-1. Thank you very much. So now, we don't have a motion on the table right now. We can, or we can discuss.
Do you want to go back to council?
Yeah, I was
point about the line.
Yeah, I think
on the next page. Or?
Yeah, I guess on page 2, line 4, it does say we, the city council and inclusivity committee. My preference, much like my previous comments, would be I just would like to maybe keep this the same for this year. I do think maybe we should have a general policy that proclamations that go through the city council should only be proclaimed by the city council. Just because, frankly, I would also be uncomfortable deleting a section and then saying that this was proclaimed by a committee that didn't agree to delete that, and I think we should have the right as the council to amend things as we see fit. So I think it might be worth kind of adopting that moving forward, but yeah, Councilor Nielsen, please.
Is this a conversation that inclusivity committee would be willing to have amongst themselves as well, and then reporting back to us as far as their feelings about having that deleted in future documents.
I mean, I think I'm happy to talk about it with them. I kind of see it as just like a city council policy of just like anything, like regardless of what committee or resident or.
So I would like to have that addressed.
Okay, yeah. I think, yeah, Counselor.
I agree with Counselor Nielsen, and I also would like to have it addressed. I actually don't even have a strong opinion on like how we end up handling it, but I'd like to.
Yeah.
I like to have like a way that we do things or that we don't.
Yeah.
And I guess to speak to that idea is that if we don't change anything in this, then I think it's appropriate to vote on the language about the inclusivity committee. If we change something, I feel uncomfortable.
Sure. Saying.
Right, making the proclamation
On their behalf.
after we changed it. I think the way that you worded it was more eloquent than what I just said, but that.
Sure. I saw Chelsea.
Oh, I was just going to say that like occasionally the Park Advisory Board does have something that they're asking you to proclaim.
Right.
Like we want,
Day,
right, but it's generally written in as a whereas, like
whereas
the Park Advisory Board asks the city council to support this.
Yeah.
So maybe that's something that could be done.
Yeah. I mean, I'm happy to talk about it with the inclusivity committee. I also would be happy to just, it feels like we have maybe consensus here to just say that from now on, city council proclamations should be proclaimed exclusively by the city council. Does it feel like there's consensus on that? Do I need to vote on that?
You're not talking about this specific
I think
proclamation, you're talking about
That's
civic
future
policy going forward.
Yeah, right.
Staff level policy, but I feel like staff is hearing your
Right,
general
okay.
intent.
I think I would like to just keep this as is since the committee already saw
You're
it.
saying don't make edits to this, but
Right,
moving
but
forward, staff
for
understands
next- yeah.
for further
You've got
drafting.
2 members of the inclusivity committee are members of the city council.
Right.
So I think what you're hearing, hopefully, is going forward, as assistant city manager said, is maybe find one of the clauses that you can identify that the inclusivity committee is behind this or making those recommendations to city council, but that their 4 clauses should be coming from the city council, because the council's voting on this. And in all transparency, at the last reading we had, that stuck out to me a little bit too. Like, why is the city council approving something on behalf of the inclusivity committee who's not here voting on this?
Yeah, no, I know.
And so I think we just remove that language going forward, and if the inclusivity committee wants the name there, that it should be in one of the whereas clauses.
The whereas clause.
Identify it's being recommended by that committee.
I also just appreciate it because I think it just varies on who drafted it. Because like I've drafted things that have gone through the inclusivity committee that don't say that, and then also on the inclusivity. So I just like consistency, and I also think just like logistically, resolving something, proclaiming something. So okay, so I feel like staff has heard that.
We already
Then any other discussion on this resolution? Councilor Andrade?
I move that we pass resolution 25-4 Women's History Month proclamation.
Is there a second? Councilor Salsa? Okay, it's been moved by Councilor Andrade, seconded by Councilor Salsa to approve resolution 25-04 Women's History Month proclamation. Is there any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, would all those in favor please raise your hand and say aye?
Aye.
All those opposed say nay.
Nay.
Okay. No abstentions. The motion passes 5-1. Thank you all very much. Next up, another one. What? Change the order. See, I knew I was going to mess this up somehow. Okay.
Gotcha.
Thank you. Okay, well, I had previously asked, Andrade, and I want to read it since it came from the Inclusivity Committee, and I'm not a woman, but, is that true? Would you like to read it? Okay.
Also, this is like the year of policy setting for the council. I
Yes.
feel like we've had a lot of conversations about like, let's formalize this. Okay. City of Philomath Resolution 25-4, Women's History Month Proclamation. Whereas the first Women's History Week was proclaimed by then President Jimmy Carter in 1980, and in subsequent years developed into Women's History Month by Congress in 1987. And whereas the theme for National Women's History Month in 2025 is Moving Forward Together, Women Educating and Inspiring Generations, to recognize women throughout the country who understand that, for a positive future, we need to eliminate bias and discrimination entirely from our lives and institutions. And whereas this proclamation is an understanding of gender diversity that has existed throughout time and across cultures by creating an allyship of cultural understanding to all gender expansive people, including but not limited to cisgender, transgender, two-spirit, gender nonconforming, genderqueer, and anyone woman or girl identified. And whereas despite the innumerable contributions women have made and continue to make, too little is taught or even known about the enormous impact women have on our collective national history. And whereas women from every part of society have been part of the building of Philomath, beginning with the indigenous people and continuing throughout history. And whereas women of Philomath have served our country proudly and with courage. And whereas women of Philomath have been leaders, fighting for freedom and justice throughout history. And whereas women of Philomath have been facilitating and passing down knowledge formally and informally throughout generations. And whereas women of Philomath have been and continue to be an economic, cultural, and social strength who work together to build a strong community. And whereas we recognize women of Philomath have had an important role throughout history, providing much of the unpaid labor and volunteer services to our community. And whereas women are making history every day and will continue to do so in ways that will change our community and our country for the better. And now, therefore, be it resolved, we, the City Council and Inclusivity Committee of the City of Philomath, Oregon, hereby proclaim March 2025 to be Women's History Month. We hereby call on the people of our community to join us in celebrating the countless women who have fought tirelessly and courageously for equality, justice, and opportunity in our communities and in our nation, passed by the City Council this 10th day of March 2025. And approved by the mayor.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And now I will flip the page. In 2505, proclamation of Library Week in Philomath, and I'm going to try to do it right this time. So, is there any discussion or amendments to Resolution 25-05?
Other than the word proclamation is
Oh,
spelled in.
and that's true. And see, I hate to say it, that's how I know I wrote this. I always spell it wrong like that.
To be fair.
Yes, thank you.
I should have found that.
I literally just spelled that wrong at work too. Oh, well. Thank you, Counselor Salsa.
You're very
assuming
welcome.
we don't need them.
We will fix that.
Okay. Any other discussion or amendments or motions? Counselor Andrade?
I move that we approve Resolution 25-5, Proclamation of Library Week in Philomath.
Is there a second on that motion? I'll second it. What the heck? Counselor Salsa, he's gotten a few seconds in already. All right, it's moved by Counselor Andrade, seconded by Mayor McMorrin to approve Resolution 2505. Is there any discussion on that motion?
I just wanted to note something.
Oh, yes.
I just wanted to note that usually you've seen this in April.
Yeah.
But because of the dates, we did it just for the record for the future when we're trying to decide which proclamations to do it.
Yep, thank you.
Yes.
Wonderful. Any other discussion? I hope you all vote yes. We love the libraries. Okay, then seeing no further discussion, would all those in favor please raise your hand and say aye?
Aye.
Okay, I see, that looks like it has passed unanimously. Counselor Irwin, I didn't ask you this in advance. Do you want to read this?
Sure.
I know you are a library fan, so.
I am, I will read it, thank you. Proclamation of Library Week in Philomath. Whereas libraries offer the opportunity for everyone to connect with others, learn new skills, and pursue their passions, no matter where they are on life's journey. And whereas libraries have long served as trusted institutions, striving to ensure equitable access to information and services for all members of the community, regardless of race, ethnicity, creed, ability, sexual orientation, gender identity, or socioeconomic status. And whereas libraries adapt to the ever-changing needs of the community, developing and expanding collections, programs, and services that are as diverse as the populations they serve. And whereas libraries play a pivotal role in the economic development by providing resources and support for job seekers, entrepreneurs, and small businesses, thus contributing to local prosperity and growth. And whereas libraries are treasured institutions that preserve our collective heritage and knowledge, safeguarding both physical and digital resources for present and future generations. And whereas libraries are an essential public good and fundamental institutions in democratic societies, working to improve society, protect the right to education and literacy, and promote the free exchange of information and ideas for all. And whereas residents of Philomath came together in the early 1990s to build the Philomath Community Library with extensive volunteer work, local fundraising, and assistance from state and federal leaders and the Oregon National Guard. And since its opening in 1995, the Philomath Community Library has been a beloved institution for children, families, and adults in Philomath and surrounding rural areas, providing access to knowledge and connection to others. And libraries, librarians, and library workers are joining library supporters and advocates across the nation to celebrate National Library Week. Now, therefore, be it resolved by the City Council of the City of Philomath that April 6th through 12th, 2025 be proclaimed as in Philomath. And be it further resolved that the City Council encourages all community members to visit the Philomath Community Library and other local libraries to celebrate the adventures and opportunities they unlock for us every day. Passed by the City Council this 10th day of March 2025, signed by Mayor McMorrin, both mayors, by this 10th day of March 2020.
Thank you very much. And I should clarify, when I said I wrote it, I did copy and paste 80% of it from the national one last year, so I don't want to take all the credit. Okay, thank you all very much. Next up, we have public comment. Do we still not have anyone? Yeah. Brad, you still good?
Copy tonight. The drive-through.
Yeah.
Yeah, I knew what I was doing. I said I'm gonna go to a city council meeting.
Okay.
He didn't even know it was a city hall.
Yeah. Right. Well, thank you.
You educated him.
Okay. Then we're scheduled to have a presentation from Jessica Haugen of the Benton County Historical Society. I believe she's ill, so that will be coming at a future meeting. Next up, we have our consent agenda, which is just minutes from our previous work sessions and meetings. Is there anything anyone would like to take? Okay, is there a motion on the consent agenda?
I'll move it.
Seconded? Okay, moved by Counselor Andrade, seconded by Counselor Caseman to approve the consent agenda. Any discussion? Seeing none, would all those in favor please raise your hand and say aye?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, the consent agenda is approved unanimously. Next up, we will move on to old business, which consists of a report on Millpond Crossing from the city manager. And I don't believe there's any action we'll need to take here. This is just to kind of bring everyone up to speed.
Yeah, thank you. So just want to recognize, again, we've got 3 new members on the city council, Mayor McLaurin coming on as mayor position. This is the largest kind of active development site that we have in Philomath. We know that housing is important. We've talked about it in our strategic planning sessions and will continue to see emphasis there at the state level, getting pushed down to counties and cities primarily to focus on housing. So I wanted to just give an update, kind of where we've been, where we are now, and kind of a near sight future. In no ways is this report meant to be total comprehensive. It is a kind of summary of some of the higher points, but I'm happy to answer any of the details if those are prevalent. But for the most part, this is meant to be a little bit more of an overview, where we've been, where we're at now, and again, a little quick look into the future where we're headed with this subdivision. Millpond Crossing is south of the elementary school, north of Chapel Drive, from 15th Street till essentially what would be 18th, but west of 19th Street, essentially. It's a fairly large development. I gave some background in the memo. I'm going to try not to repeat the memo. Again, my assumption is everybody's read through that already. But I give just a little bit of information. It was originally 5 phases. In 2018, it was going to take 2 to 3 years per phase and build out. So as far as total completion date, we still anticipated to be under construction. Obviously expected to be further along in some of the phases than what we are. And some of the later paragraphs talk about that. Talked about originally phase 1, phase 2, a little bit on DEQ and their involvement once phase 1 got underway and homes were being built. The first concerns about methane were raised. I do make a special note of that just because we do hear from the public, kind of, hey, we told you so, we told you that there was issues there. The issues on methane weren't raised during the public hearing process. They weren't discussed or even known about during the hearing process or the approval process. Those discussions all came after building permits were being issued, and DEQ said, hey, have you tested for methane? And the developer said, we haven't, should we? And yes, and so they hired a consultant to come in, start doing testing, they found methane, and then they've gone back and forth, and I won't, again, go into the mudslinging, because that's what this might turn into, but there was a lot of back and forth between the developer, the developer's attorney, the developer's paid environmental consultant, and DEQ on what was an issue as far as methane was concerned, what levels of methane were acceptable, which ones weren't acceptable, what mitigation strategies could be enacted, which ones wouldn't. I think it's safe to summarize that DEQ's biggest stance all along has been, you need to get us a full analysis of what the problem is, and then come up with a mitigation strategy that we can get behind, and then you need to follow that plan and enact all of that. And I think that's probably if I had to summarize DEQ's biggest complaint is that that's not happened, right? That the developer has been very mindful of trying to continue to develop, take mitigation steps kind of into their own hands and mitigate along the way as they went, as the plan is still being developed and as the full extent of methane issues is still being discovered. Or at this point being discovered, back then was still being discovered. I think we have a much better understanding today where we were than we did 2-3 years ago when homes were being built still without that full plan being submitted, reviewed by DEQ, approved by DEQ, and mitigation plans approved by DEQ to be enacted. So there is still back and forth between the developer and DEQ on compliance, lack of compliance, a plan, following the plan, not following the plan, at what point the consultants are involved, at what point they don't need to be involved. To what extent is continued mitigation or continued monitoring gonna need to take place? At what extent it's not going to be? And I'm not taking sides on the issue, I'm just saying there's a developer and a developer attorney, and there's DEQ and DEQ attorneys, and the city's kind of on the sidelines going, you're the regulatory agency, you're the developer, regulate the development, right? Because I don't have anybody on my staff that knows anything about monitoring for methane and what levels are acceptable and not, right? That's a state level issue on the environmental side. At times the city's been pressured to, for example, not issue certificates of occupancy because the developer wasn't compliant with a provision that DEQ had given them. The response to DEQ has always been, your DEQ, you tell them that they can't have people live in those homes. From a city standpoint, the house has been inspected and safe, their public works requirements are substantially completed. Any other development, if we withhold occupancy for this house or these homes, the city stands in a position where we might be sued for withholding an occupancy on something that legally can be occupied, pending, again, anything the city can say otherwise that it doesn't meet our qualifications for a certificate of occupancy. So in trying to keep the city out of legal trouble by withholding a certificate of occupancy for what the developer might feel was inappropriately, we've continued to issue CFOs, certificates of occupancies, and looked to DEQ to enforce environmental regulations on the development. And that continues to be our process and our stance. And that's a little bit more than what I kind of summarized in those two paragraphs. But I think that does a pretty good job summarizing the past where there's been, I'll add, there's been frustration by property owners, there's been frustration by city employees, city managers. There's been a lot of frustration by the developer on not getting good guidance from DEQ on what's the level. Well, you tell us and we'll tell you if we like it or not. Well, what's the level, right? What's the acceptable level, what's not? So, and I won't go into a lot more than that, to just say that DEQ continues to monitor, they continue to ask for reporting, they continue to ask for the developer to provide third-party information from the environmental consultant that's been hired, and they're independent, you know, they are paid by the developer, but they're an independent environmental consultant, right? So they're not gonna lose their license because they're getting paid by Levi to say whatever he wants them to say, right? They are an independent third party that's coming in and doing the work that they're being paid to perform. So I think I'll leave it that on the environmental side, because that's a portion of the project, but it's not the whole project. But it has definitely delayed the project. It's required the removal of a lot more fill than was anticipated to be removed. It's required the development to take on some loans and some grants from the state and otherwise to help pay for some of these unanticipated expenses that the development has had. Again, these are not things that back in 2018 the developer had on their list of expenses, right? I have to remove all the dirt and replace all the dirt. I have to put in monitors, alarm systems, all of this stuff. These are additional expenses that were in that original plan, and so we've seen struggles financially to keep ahead of all of this, right? So I think that summarizes it pretty good, and the DEQ staff, let me finish through, and then again, I'm happy to take any specific questions on that. PBS Environmental is the consulting firm I kind of referenced there. DEQ, let me get into 2021. At that point, phase 1 had been completed. They moved into phase 2, which was Timothy, and and most of phase 2A, which was the west side of 16th Street. 16th had been poured, and they were looking to move onto the east side of 16th Street, which they got called as. In 2021, they requested to split that phase 2 into a 2A and a 2B. So in 2021, as I stated, they applied for what our code calls a major modification, which means we have an approved subdivision with 5 phases. The developer comes to the table and says, we want to modify it. We want to change our plan from 2018. Depending on what types of changes they're wanting to do, it's either a minor modification or a major modification. A minor modification is just that, it's fairly minor. They're not increasing or decreasing the number of housing units, they're not removing or increasing the access points to the subdivision. There's a list of about 6 or 7 things that if they do that, it's a major modification.
Things like moving a phase or something like that, or splitting phases, that would be more.
A minor, yeah, it's a minor modification. It's not really impacting the overall impact of the subdivision. It's more about timing.
Yeah,
And
right.
infrastructure gets done with what phase compared to
Right.
a later phase. So
Right.
those are minor. They get reviewed by the planner, they get reviewed by Public Works and the engineer to make sure that, you know, hey, if we do this phase first, you know, not having this pipe in place with the first phase isn't gonna mess up not having it for the second phase, right? So they're looking at really, it's a very much more of an engineering puzzle piece than anything. But we notify the surrounding property owners and all of that. In this case, in 2021, it was a major modification because they were looking to move the park. They were going to remove Timothy Street. They wanted to go away from the individual houses for each property. They wanted to do townhomes so that they could get smaller lots, smaller homes, and get their costs down a little bit on what they were trying to sell them for. So they brought all that to the table in their application 2021 that went through the Planning Commission, the City Council. And at the end, it was their major modification that they had applied for was approved by the Planning Commission. The Planning City Council, I think it just stopped at Planning Commission. Planning Commission approved it. I don't think it goes on to the City Council. So the Planning Commission reviewed that. There's a public hearing for all the public to come testify. And at the end, the Planning Commission approved that with some conditions of approval and a few additions to their development agreement. I don't speak a lot about to the development agreement. So let me just touch on it real quick because I think it's important. In 2018, when it was first approved, it was approved with conditions for the approval. And one of the conditions was that the developer sign a development agreement. The development agreement itself was a separate kind of contractual obligation that the developer and the city both agreed to the terms on. It specified each of the 5 phases. It laid out which infrastructure was going to go with each phase, including the park. Right? It specified that the park had to be built at the start of phase 3 before any homes were occupied in phase 3. And so we were going to allow phase 1 to get built, get phase 2 built, but then we wanted the park. We weren't going to wait till the end of phase 5 for the park, right? You got people living there now, you got new houses coming in the future, let's get the park in, get it established. So the park was seen as one of those infrastructure pieces. Also identified when Chapel Drive was going to get done, the storm system along Chapel, all those things were in the development agreement. It also specified that even though they were getting a zoning approval for high-density residential, R3, the developer agreed that they weren't going to build any multifamily units. It was all going to be single-family residential. The reason for the R3 was it allowed them to go to 5,000 square foot lots rather than 7,000 square foot lots. So they could do smaller lots, have them close, closer together, get more houses in there, keep the cost down a little bit. But the alternative or the counter to that was the city said, we don't want big apartment complexes right here. We're good with the single family units, but we'll allow you to do them smaller. So that was all captured and controlled by that development agreement. Developer agreed to it, city agreed to it, and that got approved in 2018. In 2021, with the major modification, we added some things there. We had to change some of the infrastructure around because the park got moved, the zoning or the phasing got moved a little bit. All that got approved in 2021. One of the conditions or one of the things that got added into the development agreement with the major modification was a statement that's clear as day, black and white, that no work on phase 3 will be initiated until all the work in phase 1, 2A, and 2B has been completed. Right? We didn't want this perpetual kicking the can down the road, that phase 1 and 2 need to be whole, need to be complete. Primarily, we were looking at 16th Street and the storm line that was supposed to go under 16th Street that the developer decided didn't want to put it under 16th Street, wanted to move that over to to 17th Street, which was part of the next phase. And so they made a unilateral decision, which means they didn't have permission. They decided they weren't going to put the storm in there, they were going to pave the road, and they were going to punt the storm drain to 17th Street. I think in 10 seconds, that storm drain is what takes the water from the north end of the property down through the property and to the south side of Chapel Drive. That's the intent of that storm drain. It's not the sewer or the storm water that's collected on the subdivision. It's almost entirely and strictly the storm water that currently hits the property on the north end, goes around the property through a ditch along the north end of Timothy, down 15th Street, and back down Chapel Drive.
Yeah.
And so that water, instead of taking that roundabout way, is supposed to go through the property down to Chapel. That was supposed to go down 16th Street. It didn't get installed. He said, I'll give you plans to show how it can be installed in 17th Street. I'll do it later. I'm getting a little bit into the weeds, but let me just say that was one of the conditions that we were very concerned about, was that 16th Street needed to be completed, needed to be paved, and that the storm system needed to get installed before we were going to start building in phase 3. So, and there were a few other things that got added, but those kind of the high points, without getting too much into the engineering of it. In homes along, there was a little dispute, I won't spend a lot of time, there's a little dispute about elevation for phase 2B. And it was primarily cost driven. The cost of removing all of that fill and then backfilling all of that with rock is tremendously expensive. The developer went to the engineers and tried to see his engineers to see if there was a way that they could excavate all of the fill that was required for the methane mitigation. We're not going to leave any of that material in there to decompose and gas off into methane. We're going to remove all the dirt and all the material. But if we don't have to backfill any more than we have to, that's money saved. And so they came with a proposal to bring the elevation of those homes down about 4.5 feet from what it otherwise was planned to be, what it had already been approved to be. We took issue with that. Dropping it 4 feet would have entered it into a floodplain, would have brought it below the surrounding property's flood area, which their response was, well, we might create the floodplain for the yards, but we'll build the houses a foot above flood elevation like we're required to do when we build in the floodplain. And again, the city went back to that approval in 2021, and it clearly says that you can't create new flood area, which is what that excavation would have done, is creating new flood area. So pushing back and forth in a stall of about another year, fighting back and forth, the city prevailed, and they ended up agreeing to backfill and bring it back up to a foot above base flood elevation in the surrounding area. And the developer one, because it wasn't as high as it used to be, it was lower by about 1.5 feet, 2 feet than what it had prior been planned to be, but it wasn't as low as they had wanted it to be, right? So kind of met in the middle, which I was fine with because it was still a foot above flood elevations of the surrounding area, which meant not only were the houses not going to get flooded, but the yards wouldn't get flooded either, which is important. But again, that was about another 8-month delay, 9-month delay just in getting that conversation taken care of. Once we got that resolved, got all the elevations set, they've started building on the east side of 16th Street, phase 2B. That construction's going on today. The city's been issuing certificates of occupancies. The developers had PBS Consulting come in, do the methane testing. The readings of the road have been nothing because there's no material there to be gassing off. They're still finding methane tests, positive methane tests on the west side of 16th Street, not in the houses or the crawl spaces or the garages, but they're finding it in the yards. On the west side of 16th Street, they didn't excavate everything. They just excavated where the houses were, but the yards and things they left. So they're still finding pockets of methane in the yards because there's still organic material there. That I want to summarize too much. DEQ's primary concern initially was if that gas was traveling underground and would get eventually under the houses, would seep under the homes and come up through the homes or not. And based on the findings from PBS, they've got some pretty good certainty or data showing that that's not happening. It's gassing up. It's not traversing side to side and underneath houses based on the lack of positive test results that they found in crawl spaces, garages, houses, etc. So that's kind of, again, back to methane and transferring where we're at. I think going forward in these future phases, the methane point is going to become moot very quickly because the mitigation plan, although not completely approved by DEQ yet, but the mitigation plan for PBS is to remove all the material. And when all the material is filled, backfilled with rock, that the source of the problem is not. It's good, it just needs to get written out fully, submitted to DEQ and approved, that's not happened yet. But will need to happen before we continue with phase 3. So that kind of gets us up to date. The city's issuing CFOs. We've got quite a bit of confidence that those homes are safe. They've been inspected by our building inspector, contract with the county to do that work. Public Works has looked at them, Planning's looked at them, I've reviewed them. We're getting reports from PES that they've gone in and done inspections, that they're not finding readings. And so we've been issuing occupancies on those homes on the east side of 16th Street. So that's phase 2B. So phase 3 is knocking at the door, right? And the developer is now looking future to phase 3 on what steps do I need to take today so that I know I've got funding and approvals for phase 3. Just a few weeks ago, the developer submitted an application for a minor modification. So again, it's not changing the number of housing units, it's not changing access, any of that, it's phasing change. And they would like to change phase 3 and 4. I didn't mention 2021, it got broken down to 4 phases instead of 5. It went from 5 phase to 4 in 2021. What they like to do now is instead of having a phase 3 and a phase 4, is they want to have a phase 3A, phase 3B, which will be on the south end, and a phase 4, which is on the north end. The current phasing is phase 3 is the park and everything south, or everything north and a little on the south. Phase 4 is this very small pocket of a cul-de-sac with townhomes on both sides, a very small phase 4. So I think what the developer, reading into the map a little bit, he's trying to get all 3 remaining phases, well, the 2 remaining phases cut into 3 phases of about the same size, with the focus being on the south end and phase 4 being that last finished piece on the northeast end of the development. Mostly it's financial driven, right? I mean, most developers can only borrow so much money. And this is where this developer is. He can get enough money to borrow for phase 3A, get all the infrastructure in, roads, storm, the park, all of that still comes. Phase 3B, once phase 3 infrastructure's in, then he's now available for that line of credit or that loan. He can put the infrastructure for 3B, get that built, and then he's got the money or the loan ability to go get the loan for phase 4. So he submitted that. It's under review right now. There's a little confusion today because the announcement that the neighbors got in that 250-foot radius was that they had till today at 5 o'clock to submit any comments to the planner. So as the planner's doing his review, he can make note of any concerns that the neighbors might have. So that expired today at 5, and then this got dropped on the agenda for tonight's meeting. And so there's some people thinking tonight was like a hearing or something that where they wanted to come tonight to provide public comment. So we got a couple of people that raised concerns. I think we've addressed both of them. Well, the 2 that raised concerns we've addressed. Let them know they can provide written comment. One of them, I even said we'd extend the period for comment till tomorrow at 5 o'clock. So if there was confusion, they still have tomorrow to get comments in. So that minor modification, again, we'll take comments through tomorrow at 5 for that. We'll extend it out a day. And then that just is a staff report. They're going to, again, meet with Public Works, meet with the engineer, make sure all the phasing still works. We're going to look at the previous development agreement, make sure nothing there needs to be tweaked or clarified. And then I'll sign off on that as the planning official with some additional conditions of approval and maybe some modifications to the development agreement for just the phasing portion of those next phases. One thing of note is, I don't want to get the weeds with it, in 2021, as I mentioned, one of the things that triggered the major modification 2021 is they wanted to remove Timothy Street, which is what comes off 15th. I was going to connect 15th to 17th Street before it goes north to the school. The Planning Commission, led by staff, felt very strongly we didn't want to lose that east-west connectivity. We felt that was important. We didn't want people to have to go all the way down to Chapel in order to go east and west. We felt we wanted them to be able to go east and west through the development. So as a condition of the approval in 2021, the Planning Commission said that they have to put in Timothy Street, and they'd be allowed to put housing units on the north and the south side of Timothy Street. In the major modification application, that section of Timothy Street that got removed was put in as kind of an extension of the park area. So we had the park kind of below, and above that was this area where Timothy Street used to be. And so when the Planning Commission made that, they specifically looked at the existing park and the footprint of the park and what the park would look like without that extra land up above, if they were to make the requirement that that be Timothy and housing. And with that, they agreed that that street going through and that additional housing was more valuable than the kind of additional park space up there. Didn't have any playground equipment. It was just kind of a walking trail and just open green space. And so that condition of approval was put on the development in 2021. The most recent draft plans that we've seen for phase 3A, 3B, and 4 have Timothy Street drawn in and have the housing on both sides and have the footprint of the park, which is the correct footprint of the park, minus Timothy Street with the houses on either side. So again, there's, I don't know, necessarily confusion, but it's the updated map we have now is essentially in response to what was mandated by the developer in 2021 as a condition of approval for the major modification. We didn't want to lose the Timothy Street connection. The minor modification, although the updated map we're going to get is going to show new houses, it's not new houses because of the minor modification, it's new houses because of the major modification 2021, which we're now seeing for the first time. So again, don't want any confusion there, we're just putting that out there now. So where we are today and looking forward is here. I still have concerns about methane in phase 1 and 2. The developer has not been as consistent as doing the studies as DEQ wants them to do, or as I would like to see them do those checks. But they just did the checks. I believe I forwarded the email to the city council. They just did them last month. They're scheduled to come out again after 3 months now, but that next one's already been scheduled. So I fully anticipate and expect that the developer is back on the bandwagon of getting those inspections completed for the methane reviews for the phase 1 and 2 properties. I don't have a lot of concern about the safety of residents in those homes because we've not seen any positive studies over the last 4 years of methane in crawl spaces, garages, or homes. There's just none. It's zero. They're not there. But we are seeing the side yards, and the plan needs to be figured out on how we're going to mitigate that if DEQ is going to make them regulate it. And I'm not 100% convinced that DEQ is going to make them regulate that. They may just require that they monitor it. I don't know. But no, not the experts. But I have some concerns there, not for fire life safety. I have concerns about, or like people safety. I have concerns about what's the long-term plan there, because one isn't approved yet. So DEQ developer, get a plan in place, send me a copy, let me know so I can tell resident what's the long-term plan. Because residents don't know what the long-term plan is. That's very frustrating. People just coming into your yard checking monitor stations inevitably. Like for how long? How long are we doing this, right? So that's a concern I've got. I've got concerns about paving 16th Street. That's scheduled for this next week. Believe it when I see it, right? I know it's scheduled. I hope it'll get done, right? I know that this development has been strained financially. And I don't mean that derogative towards the developer themselves. This development has had some unforeseen expenses. There have been, a lot of developments go through some decision-making processes. A big development, there's going to be some gaps and things that fall away. So I'm not making excuses for the developer, but what I'm saying is it's been a financially constrained project for the last several years. And we'll see. I hope that it gets paid this week. There's been commitments have been made. I hope that that can be made, but I know that it's depending on financially being able to pay for that to get done. And I'll just end it with, I think the minor modification from what I've seen will likely get approved. It seems pretty minor as is defined, some changing of the phases, but we will be holding the developer to that original condition that everything in phase 1 and 2, 2A, 2B, needs to be done before we're building any houses in phase 3. This minor modification isn't building, it's not development, right? He's trying to get his finances figured out for how am I going to pay for phase 3A, then 3B, then phase 4, To me, that's not development, it's moving the lines on a page, getting an approval. So I don't have any problem doing a minor modification approval, even though all the houses in phase two aren't done. That's okay by me. We've got the plan submitted for the water, or the storm water line has been submitted, is getting approvals. It's going back and forth between the engineers to get things fixed. I highly anticipate that will be done for the developer's timeline within the next month to 2 months, as soon as Benton County gives them the green light, because it's connected in the Benton County storm system. Benton County has to approve it. Once we get the green light from Benton County, I fully anticipate the development will be able to move forward with that development of the storm system, which is one of those requirements. And then Chapel Drive will come in with phase three. When phase three gets approved, we'll see all of the engineering for the street, for Chapel Drive, the bike ped path that goes all along that stretch of Chapel Drive. The park, we'll see the final engineering for the park and all the playground equipment, everything else. A lot of it's scripted and what needs to be there, but we haven't seen design engineering for that yet. Those will come in. So I think the development as a whole is at a.
15th, right? I mean, that's included, yes.
The what?
Chapel Drive will go from 15th all the way through to the other side, is that right?
Yes.
Or connect to where the 19th and Chapel project is, yeah?
Yeah, where the county finished
Yeah.
on 19th, or at
Yeah.
19th Street. Yep. Yeah, we agreement 2018, we allowed them to build phase 1 and 2 without doing that little bit of Chapel Drive there. So it was such a small piece. And we said when phase 3 comes in, that's when all of Chapel Drive can be that one street project rather than doing it in sections, right? So I'll leave it there. I don't want to overspeak for the developer. I don't want to necessarily overspeak on the city's part. I would just say that we continue to be optimistic. We know we need the housing, right? And I guess I'll say this, there are cities that are bending over backwards to try to get a developer at the door just to consider building homes in their cities. There are cities that are giving hundreds of thousands of dollars to developers to come to their city and build on city land, city-owned land that they're deeding over to them. There's a lot of efforts in play. Our state legislature is looking at millions of dollars to, incentivize housing development. And that's not to say that we don't expect developers to act in good faith and be professional. But at the same time, when we have a developer at the door wanting to develop in Philomath, it's really hard for me at the city to put up unnecessary obstacles and hurdles in a developer's way, whether that's past performance or reputation or future expectations. There's a developer at the door that's wanting to invest in Philomath and provide housing for our future residents, and the city will continue to work with that developer to make that happen, hold them accountable, hold them to the requirements they're required to have. And I can't do a whole lot more than that. We've tried to be a good resource to the community. When residents call, I'm very transparent with them. I start how much time do you have, right? I can give you a lot, I can give you a little. What questions do you have? The city is very transparent on what's going on. We've never tried to hide anything. We've been very forthcoming with folks. I have realtors that call me, hey, what's the story with this? How much time do you have? I can give you a story. Where are you at? What are your concerns? What have you heard? Let me clarify. Let me just tell you where it is. And buyer beware, right? Know what you have going into it. There's still disclosures the developer is required to give per DEQ that they're giving to future buyers. So my primary concern is always the city. I'm looking at city liability going forward. I'm looking at, where are we at on our relationship with DEQ? Where are we at with the relationship with this developer, future developers? I don't want to talk about worst case scenario. We were there a year and a half, 2 years ago. We were looking at a worst case scenario. It was not good for the city. I do not want to inherit that property and have that be the city's problem that we then have to try to deal with. So again, as long as we have a developer at the table that's willing to continue to invest in Philomath, the city will continue to work with that developer and hold them accountable and try to get these houses in. To put rose-colored glasses on, this future development I think is going to look awesome. I mean, if we can get through all the things that are planned for there, the park's going to be exceptional. I think having some townhouses that are a little more affordable and hit a little bit better price point for people in Philomath as an option, I think is a great option. That was one that we don't have a lot of right now. We have townhomes for rent, we have apartments for rent, and we have older houses for sale, and we have some really big new houses for sale. We don't have a lot of new, smaller stuff coming in that people can upgrade into or downsize into, or first-time home buyers. We just don't have that niche right now. And I think that these future phases will provide that. So that was maybe more than you bargained for, but I just wanted to kind of get everything out, and I'm happy to answer any specific questions that you might have.
Thank you very much. Councilor Nielsen?
Just a question about that revised phasing. Where does the park come in which phase of that revision?
The park has to come in as part of phase 3 infrastructure. So phase 3 infrastructure will be the park, the storm line. The storm line is really part of phase 2B, but so let me not say storm line. The park, the roads that are going to be part of phase 3A, all of the water lines, the sewer lines that support phase 3A, that all comes in as 3A, and that all has to be done, completed, and inspected before we issue a building permit. Okay, so we don't issue building permits till all that infrastructure is in. Once all the infrastructure is in for 3A, the proposal is we'll start issuing building permits. And once we start issuing building permits for phase 3A, the agreement is going to, what we're going to put in the development agreement is we're not going to issue any certificates of occupancy in phase 3A until all of the infrastructure for 3B is completed. So phase 3 really is phase 3. The distinction between A and B is they're going to start building homes in phase 3A. They're not going to occupy those homes. They got to get 20, 25 homes built. And then they'll have the infrastructure funding that they need for phase 3B. All of phase 3B infrastructure will go in. So we'll have all the infrastructure for phase 3, the park, Chapel Drive, bike ped path, water, sewer, street, sidewalk, etc. for phase 3 will all go in before we issue certificate of occupancy for phase 3. So before anybody can live there, all of phase 3 infrastructure will be in place. The only reason we're really splitting it is because financially you can't get the loan for all of phase 3 infrastructure. He's got to do infrastructure for 3A first, which includes the park, and infrastructure for phase 3B, which includes Chapel Drive second. Those two have got to get split off or there's not enough funding to cover all of the infrastructure in one go. But as far as residents will know, when they start actually selling homes in phase 3A, they'll already be building homes in phase 3B, and they'll just continue that. And as those homes are being built and sold, he'll be doing infrastructure in phase 4. I mean, the intent is to just keep rolling through at this point. So there's a lot of things still contingent. We've still got to get a plan from DEQ approved. I mean, there's still some things to happen, but that's, at this point today, that's the plan.
Councilor Nielsen?
Sorry. And will there also be soil removal for the park area? Is that part of the DEQ? Do you know if that's part of the DEQ requirements? I'm personally hoping that that's true.
So again, there's not a approved plan by DEQ yet, but that is the recommendation from PBS, the environmental consultant, and in talking to the developer, that is the intent. Absolutely, is to all of that ground is coming off. DEQ, you've maybe seen out there last summer. DEQ is actually making them sift a lot of that dirt and get the bigger material out of it. And so there's actually these big round drums that roll and actually sift out and bring out the bigger material. And so there was a couple stockpiles, I think they're still there, stockpiles of the bigger material. There's a stockpile of the concrete material. And then what's left is the mounds of dirt. And they're very specific, even that dirt that gets hauled off, it can only be hauled off in like 4-inch increments. So they can't put like, 20 inches of it on some farmer's field. It can go out in 4-inch increments, but that's it. Because the DEQ, DEQ is very big on the regulation of the material coming off the site and how it's treated. So all that's being overseen by DEQ. When I say there's not a master plan, I mean there's not a plan for the entire site, but certain aspects of it DEQ has signed off on and given specific direction about how to handle material. So that has been done. And so yes, the park is part of that phase 3, where all the soil will be removed and it'll be backfilled with either rock or new soil.
Thank you. Counselor Caseman?
Yeah, so obviously, there's a lot going on there, and as a layman, I don't even know what to ask necessarily. But just for those homeowners in Millpond that are angry or frustrated, is there anything the city can do? And this is kind of my first time in this context, this story, so I don't know what to ask, but
Yeah, the city is going to take, that's a good segue into one thing. So the lot line adjustment issue is something the city is going to take a more proactive stance in. Quick back, because I feel like I've talked a lot, some of you are stirring. I'm going to tell you how it's supposed to work. The way it's supposed to work is all the infrastructure gets put in, including the water, sewer, street. The city, Public Works, looks at all of those installations and approves them. When the street specifically is approved, then the developer will call the surveyors and come in and they'll set all the pins on all the property lines. And once all those pins are set, then the homeowners know where they can build their fences, where their property line is, and all of that. Until the city approves the street, they don't call the surveyors to come in and set property pins. 16th Street, because the decision was made by the developer not to put the storm under 16th Street, the city has yet to approve 16th Street as a city street. It's a private street owned by Millpond Crossing. It's not a public street yet. So Millpond Crossing has responsibility for maintenance and completion of that road. And until the storm pipe is installed, whether it be there or somewhere else, we're not going to approve the street. So the pins never got set. People are moving into houses because said, yeah, I know there's still development going on, but I'm going to lose my lock on my mortgage loan if I don't get into my house next weekend. And so the city, with those understanding on those homes, we gave occupancy for homes on 16th Street, knowing that the street hadn't been completed, although it was substantially complete, right? Hard surface it was in. There wasn't stormwater lines underneath it. They needed to get designed and put somewhere else. But we still determined that it was in the best interest of the city and new residents that we go ahead and deem the road, substantially complete enough that we could give certificate of occupancy. The houses were safe, people could move in and live there, just knowing that the street wasn't yet. As people started moving in, wanted to build fences, they looked and saw, well, these property pins aren't in the right way. The stakes that get put in the ground were torn out. Some were missing. Some were, put in different spots. So the developer agreed to call the surveyor and have the pins put in. When they did that, they discovered that many of the stakes that had put in the ground were not where the pins were, or that the pins were different places than the stakes should have been. So the stakes determine how far the foundation of the homes were supposed to be placed. So the result of that was about 12 houses on the west side of 16th Street were built too close to the property line. It's supposed to be a 5-foot setback from the property line in the house. And many of them, in like 12 situations, were, maybe instead of 5 feet, they were 4 feet away from that property line, or 3.5 feet away, or 5.5 feet away, right? So although the city had already approved certificate of occupancy, right? We didn't know the other because we didn't know the lots from the wrong spot. Typically that gets looked at when the inspection's done on the foundation, but that, again, we usually look at the foundation, we look at the stake, and they do a kind of eyeball, say, yeah, it's 5 feet, we're good. But at the end of the day, it's on the developer to make sure that the foundations get put in the right spot based on the markings that they put out there, which are temporary surveying stakes, right? So anyway, long story short, once it was realized that there were all of these done, the developer's engineer put together a map that showed all the property lines that were off and recommendations to adjust them 9 inches, 8 inches, 12 inches to get to where everybody was either at the 5 foot or as close to the 5 foot as they could without a negative impact on other surrounding property owners. We talked about the best way to fix that problem. And at the time it was determined that if we did lot line adjustments for each of those homes and we got them all done simultaneously, that all those lot lines could be adjusted that little bit. We'd approve them all at once, submit them all to the county at this one time, get them all recorded, and we'd update the maps, have the legal descriptions, all of that to match, and we get it fixed. Developer said, hey, I'll pay for the application fees, I'll pay for the surveys. If the landowners Mortgage companies need a reappraisal because they're losing some property, 9 inches or a foot from their side for, 120 feet long. I'll do the reappraisals. I'll pay if my mistake, my guy screwed up, I'll pay for it. Just send me the bill, let me know what I need to pay for. So then the developer and city, we held a neighborhood meeting, we explained that process, neighbors were upset. We said, this is a process to follow. About half the neighborhood, maybe more, or the neighbors involved, reached out to their lenders, signed the paperwork they needed to sign to notify, disclose, made all the arrangements. We did get lot line adjustment signatures from everybody, so applications all came in. Levi paid for all those. But we couldn't get everybody. And 6 months went by, a year went by, a year and a half went by, continued outreach. Some of the lenders said, well, that was 6 months ago, you gotta renew it now. Had to renew, get reapprovals, people moved out, new people moved in. What's this all about? And it got us to where we're at today. And so we didn't really have a carrot to get people to comply. And admittedly, we were very hesitant to use a stick and to force people to comply by charging fines or fees, because it wasn't their fault as the homeowner, right? The developer's the one screwed up, admittedly, but the homeowner has the responsibility now to make sure that they're compliant with those setback requirements. So we were very cautious 2.5, 3 years ago to start fining people for non-compliance with their setback requirements. Where we're at today is, I believe the best path forward is for the city to take a more proactive stance, and rather than leave that to the developer to reach out to property owners to submit these applications and try to align all that, is to do a replat, which would essentially replat that whole area. We still need to get the signatures from all of the property owners. We still have to go back to the lenders, but it's all one approval. It's one document. It shows the signatures and those who have signed, those who haven't signed. So there's maybe a little bit more peer pressure because it'll be very obvious on who hasn't signed the document yet. So we're not yelling and hollering at the developer or the city. We can put a little peer pressure on the property owners, and the city can put a threat out there of the fines, right? We can start issuing, say, like, you got 2 months to take care of this. If it's not done in 2 months, we're going to issue you a fine. And if you haven't complied after 10 days, we're going to issue another fine, and we'll issue a fine every day until it's taken care of. I think without that stick there, we're just going to have some property owners that just won't comply because it doesn't necessarily impact them negatively. It's not a lot of land. It's just a matter of getting it right and being compliant. So that's the process we're just kickstarting now. So I think the way to be helpful, sound like I'm speaking on both, but the way to be helpful is to be a little more punitive this time for those that aren't getting into compliance, because it's the property owners on 16th Street that have been trying to comply and doing all this work. They're the ones most frustrated, right? And because the process hasn't got completed and it's not done yet. So we're going to open ourselves up to taking that problem on, to trying to correct that error. The developer's still at the table, offering funding, offering to pay for appraisals, offering to pay for compensation for land that might be lost if the fence line gets moved onto your property more. There'd be compensation that would be paid. So that process will get more vocal. And so unfortunately, we'll probably get more people upset at us in the next few months. But I think other property owners will be more alleviated that we're finally taking a more proactive stance and taking care of that problem. So lot line adjustments on West 16th Street have been contentious. That was a loaded question and I unloaded on you.
Are there any thoughts on that or question?
Appreciate, Chris, that you take the time to actually kind of get, I know the backstory of all of this, just with the fire department, but it's good that we kind of have an idea of why some people are going to get upset anyway, where it wasn't their fault, right? But appreciate the stance that the city is taking to cure the problem.
Yeah, and I don't think there's none of the residents of Millpond Crossing have any fingers pointed at them, right? Nobody there did anything wrong.
No.
Nobody has. And in fact, I get the frustration when they call and they're yelling, screaming at me. It's like, no, I get it, right? Like, I totally get it. There's a lot of frustration there.
Yeah.
And I don't blame anybody in the Millpond Crossing subdivision for being upset.
Yeah.
But that said, there's constructive ways to deal with the problem and there's less constructive ways to deal with the problem. And we're looking for constructive ways to try to fix it. We recognize it's not your fault. We gotta get past that. And now we gotta get down to we solve the problem rather than just yelling and screaming and hollering at whoever's fault it was, right? So, you know, there's property owners on North Timothy Street. They've got a ditch behind their home because that's where the storm still is going because the new storm hasn't been installed.
Right.
They would like a backyard. They'd like a fence in their backyard. They'd like a spot for their kids and their dog to be able to go out and play. They don't have it still. 3 years later. Because the storm line hasn't been submitted, hasn't been approved, hasn't been constructed. They're waiting, right? Very frustrating. Very frustrating. So.
Got it.
So we'll continue to be proactive. We'll continue to enforce. At the same time, we got a developer in hand, and if we push too hard, that developer will fold up the tent and go away, and we'll have a real mess on our hands. So there's levers we can pull, and then there's other levers that we don't want to pull, right? We don't want to pull too hard. So.
Yeah, do you mind, we can also talk like in our monthly meeting, but it was really helpful to hear this background. You probably already said it, but which phase is the storm line meant to be in?
Phase 2.
So it's gonna be complete before you move on to phase 3?
Yes.
Okay. And this is just a follow-up question, but is there an HOA?
No.
Okay. Good to know.
There's a storm track, but the city took ownership of that with a payment in lieu of.
Got it.
So we have a storm track, but otherwise there's no shared common space.
Got it.
For phase 1, 2, or 2B. Future phases will, because they'll have the townhomes, and so they'll have smaller shared ownership, maintenance type agreements and stuff.
But not any sort of larger HOA?
I don't know yet. That's proposed. There's more common areas there, but they're trying to fill those in with housing and yards, so there's less of that. I think the goal is to not have common shared areas other than some of the alleys, the back alleys, they'll have some shared stuff with shared maintenance, but I don't think it will be a neighborhood HOA. I think it may be more to the buildings,
Just a
but I
shared
don't know yet.
agreement regarding those private roads potentially.
Right.
That makes sense.
Right. And roofs and yards and.
Yeah. And then, sorry, you probably said this too, but who's taking the replat? Is the city or is the developer taking the replat?
The developer's engineer has it replatted and will pay for the replat. The city's gonna take a more proactive role in getting signatures on the replat and trying to work with neighbors to explain the process and define boundaries and all that.
Okay, but whose application will it be?
The developers.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Counselor Andrade?
Two things. One, thank you very much for especially having it written out. It's very helpful to have it all in one place, just because I know that like there has been so much. And then the other thing was, I'm under the impression that some might have held back on like getting on board with the lot line adjustments because of like compensation issues, besides the whole like the things that we've covered about how like there are certain things we can't like withhold from the developer because like we can be liable if we do that, like with the C of Os and stuff. But clear that funding has been secured or to compensate everyone accordingly, or is that still and like has that all been what's the word, like standardized and stuff across? Because I also heard and I don't know how of just like there might not be standard rates applied.
There was at the neighborhood meeting that was held when we really started first talking about the lot line adjustment situation. The developer was at that meeting, Levi was at that meeting. There was one property owner that had already agreed to the lot line adjustment and already had an agreed price with Levi. And I believe that, I don't know what that number ever was. And the developer At that meeting, which I think not all, a majority of the neighbors were there, Levi put a number out there that they all felt was fair. And it was based off of an appraisal that had been done or something. And honestly, I can't remember that dollar amount, but it's so much per square foot lot. That was 3 years ago. So, I mean, I think in fairness, that number needs to be looked at again.
Yeah.
And it should be standardized. I don't think that any individual property owner should ask for more money than the next one next door. I think that, to be fair, if the developer says, I'll pay X amount for anybody who loses property for every square foot they lose, seems pretty fair, right? And it shouldn't be based on appraised value times 10 for a penalty times whatever. I mean, it should be some type of number that he can rely on as well, because he's got to be able to justify that expense. But, so I would say that the developer was very agreeable to a price. That price seemed to be very acceptable to the majority of the neighborhood that was there at that time, but we never really got to that point. It was more about, let's get applications filled out by everybody. Let's get the legal descriptions for all the new legal descriptions. Every time you change the lot line, you got a new tax lot with a new legal description. So those have all been paid for already. And that work's all been done by the surveyors. And then it was, okay, now it's your turn, property owner, you need to go to your lender, your mortgage holder, and make sure that they know that we're doing a modification to the legal description and get them to sign off on it so that you can sign on the plat or for the recording. And that's where a lot of them got hung up, and some just haven't taken that step yet. So we never really got to that full part of
Gotcha.
this, you've completed the documentation, here's your check, that we never got there.
Okay, because to that note, I wonder if it would be helpful to get that in writing first to help.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, I think it would.
because if they were afraid that they weren't going to get proper compensation, then I don't blame them for not.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Signing.
I don't think anybody there
It's
had
what
to
little I know about
pay
it.
anything out of pocket. It's all been paid, all of the upfront costs have been paid for by the developer. So he's held true to his word there. We have to move on.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I know that was a lot of work. I have no idea if this had anything to do with it, but I sent Chris a very simple email last month, just being like, "Hey, what's going on with Millpond?" And it was a much more thorough response than I was anticipating we would get. So, thank you.
Super useful, because I
The timings.
little bit of lots of good time.
And I will just say, I know I feel like I assume most, if not all of us, have heard the frustrations of the community members in that neighborhood, and those are very real. And I don't live there, but I would share that frustration if I did. And I hope that none of what we do is interpreted as downplaying that or not recognizing that and validating that. I think we also want to close this chapter and learn from it and move on to something better in the future. But part of closing this chapter is finishing the project. And so that's, I think, a message maybe to folks there is us trying to finish the project is not indicative of us not being aware of the problems. But
I didn't reference the map, and I see many of you had it kind of right in front of you. If you kind of imagine the green bar goes along the top, if you kind of imagine Timothy is there on the left, if you imagine Timothy going across, the houses are about the same width, right? So they're going to be from the north side of Timothy up to the property line. And the south side's going to look similar to the houses south on Timothy, right? Except those are full houses. Instead, they'll be townhomes. So about the same depth, but they'll be narrower. So if you imagine Timothy going through and about that length, in fact, the house on the corner there, the southeast corner of Timothy and 16th, it'll be about that depth. So if you follow that line across, that's going to kind of define your new park space, right? So
I figured it was 3.5 acres or something.
No, I think it was 3.5. It was 3.4.
Yeah, so it's not bad.
So it's got a kids playground, older kids, little kids, sports park, restrooms, pavilion, few parking spaces. And then it's got a large area that'll serve as the storm detention area. So in the winter, it might get a little soggy, but during the summer, it's just gonna be like a field that's kind of sunken down on the sides. So it'll function as a soccer field, basically, got the ball around, whatever, so.
Sorry, who owns the storm?
We haven't negotiated that yet. On the last one, the city took payment in lieu of, and we maintain it. This one, because they'll have other HOA areas, we're kind of waiting to see if the HOA keeps that, or if we take it on as part of the park and just maintain it as park space.
Well, let me know. Yeah, let's talk. Yeah, I'll
we'll
talk
talk
about it more separate, but thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Any final thoughts, comments, questions on Millpond Crossing? Well, not to say this is the last time we'll talk about it, but for tonight.
For tonight.
Yes.
I do try to provide a bullet point at least in my management
Yeah.
report on all things, but Millpond especially, because I know it's a point of contention with your constituents, and I want you to be informed and up to date on what's happening there. So I'll continue that, but at any time, any month, anytime you have questions or you hear something, please
Yeah.
contact me. I tell the neighbors there often, I'm glad you're calling, because otherwise, like, I don't drive out there every day, right? So I don't know what's going on. I don't know what's going on, so keep me informed, let me know what's happening. If there's big equipment out there moving, let me know, So same goes for you. If you see things or you hear things out there, please just shoot me an email, shoot me a text, let me know, so we can stay on top of it.
On that note, I haven't looked relatively recently, but in the not so distant recent time period, I did notice a lot of flooding in that area. Has there been any talk about safety measures and?
So and I took a couple phone calls, so.
It looked pretty deep from where I stood.
Yeah, so they don't have, one of the conditions of development is you have to keep stormwater on your property, and it can only flow off as fast as it did prior to development. And so until that new storm detention area and the park gets built, and all the homes and all the storm pipes and all that gets connected, they have to keep all that stormwater on site. They can't just let it run into the ditch. So they've created kind of a little temporary makeshift dike area to keep all the stormwater on site. And it's already dropping down a little bit, and it will continue to. I think we've hopefully been the worst of it. It's just real woods. We did get a couple concerns. So I will say that all of the backyards along that east side of 16th Street have storm drains there. That's where their gutters drain down to, is the backyards, and it drains out that way. So even with the water tape press there, it's going to hit that storm and it's going to head out and get under there. So homes, I don't think we're ever in danger. It was just a little scary to see the water rising in the back there. Yeah, it looks like it's going down. As development continues to progress, we won't see that type of thing happening again.
Okay.
We need to do some development this summer, get some more development in place, get more infrastructure in place, so we don't have those types of things in the future.
The last thing I'll say is I just really appreciate the update and the work that you put into sharing this. I think we are sometimes a very action-oriented council, and we only have things on the agenda when it's action, which I think there's a lot of work to, but I also think it's really good for us to know what's going on, even when you don't need a decision from us, just because you all do a lot, and it's sometimes just helpful to know what that is, even if you don't need us to make a decision or approve anything. So I really appreciate all the work that went into this. Okay, with that, we'll close our update on Millpond Crossing. I'm just going to do a quick check. Does anyone urgently need a break? If not, my thought is we'll just finish our agenda, then do a quick break before the executive session. Does that work, or does someone want it right now?
Let's motor through.
I feel like wants it now.
I'm not part of the cabinet.
We're gonna,
Take a break.
yeah, if you need it, okay.
Stop, you can just.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I just think since we're almost to the end of our agenda, let's just finish up and then we'll take a quick break before executive session. So G, we already completed our review of the audit. Reports of boards, commissions, committees, council liaisons, and staff.
And G2 real
Oh,
quick.
yes,
on
okay.
The remodel.
Oh, shoot, I forgot about that. How long is that gonna be?
I think I can keep it to 5 minutes.
All right.
Oh, done?
Start the timer.
Yeah.
On Friday, I'm looking at now, 9:12 for the record. On Friday, I emailed the council the initial estimate that came in from G. Christensen Construction. We've been working with them for almost a year now to get initial design and then get to where we've got drawings now. We're ready to submit for building permits. And we asked them for an estimate so that we can go out for an RFP. Really, it's not RFP, it's request for bids. So we want to bid this project, right? We're ready to get bids. The RFP that I put out, although a lot of information is good and relevant, city attorney took some issues with some of the language in there, to put it nicely. Is that nice? So it'll be revised a little bit, but I did want you to know, and I put in the staff report here, that initial estimate came at 516 to 598. Money in the bank for that project is $430,000. So the proposal I'm going to put out there is let me say this, there's at least 3 line item figures in there that I think are priced much higher than what they need to be, and they're things that are like an $80,000 flip, right? So I think that the difference between the 516 or 590 even to the 430 maybe isn't like insurmountable. I think we can get there. What I'd like to propose, I don't need any action from the council, I'm just updating you. We'll be releasing the RFP, and then the rest easy part is we'll bring back the actual contract to you to review and to approve. But as far as what's going out there in the request for bids, is we're gonna put a bid out there for all the interior work. And then a lot of those exterior things, we're gonna put as an option, and then depending on what the prices look like when they come in as kind of optional work that they can do and bid on, then we may pull the trigger on some of those and we may not. But most importantly, the interior stuff absolutely has to happen. We'll help with the ADA, security, expanding space, getting room for a prosecutor and the judge to have places to meet with people that aren't in the hallway in front of the bathrooms, those types of things. So I'll finalize that request for bids this week. I'll do the sample contract up. We'll get that approved by the city attorney, and we'll get it out and get it published. What I'm pushing up against is a bunch of contractors are going to be filled for the summer, not be looking for work anymore. And we're into March right now, and if they don't have plans for June, July, and August, we're going to miss them, right? So I want to get it out, get some bids in, get somebody on the hook, and then we can talk about the optional exterior stuff that we can do. So that's the plan. Again, no action needed. But I'm excited. If you want to see a specific plan, stop by my office and I can show you layout and all that kind of stuff. It's not too crazy, but the gist of it, yeah, saw today. The gist of it's going to be, as we've talked about, to enclose the lobby, protect staff from the general public or crazy people coming into City Hall and throwing stuff at people. So we'll have full wall-to-ceiling walls with 3 service windows, planning, utility, and municipal court. And so we'll have 3 service windows that people can come up to and take care of their business at City Hall. But the rest of the workstations will be kind of tucked back behind. The planner's going to come out of here and move out into the workstation there. So it's fairly minor as far as that goes. The exterior's got some cool coverings, some nice timber frame, stuff out there, some new lighting, that type of bit. So the windows is the other one. I'll probably leave that an option. I don't know. I might make that a requirement. I think staff will kill me if I don't make the windows a little bit bigger. So we'll probably leave that in. But all of the little pocket windows that we have in the front, we're going to lower those down. Those same width, same header, but we'll drop them down a little bit lower. So when staff are sitting at their desks, they'll be able to look outside and see what's going on instead of just looking up at the sky all the time.
I realized this week that I was standing there talking about things on the road, and 2 of the other employees were saying, when we stand up, we cannot see any of that. We can actually not see out of the windows at all except for the sky.
We can tell from the reflections and some of the things that,
Yes, so
something's happening.
it was like a valid point that I can see things, but they cannot.
think the windows were 14,000 something, so we'll probably leave that in. I think the budget's there, so anyway. I want to get the information out. I want you to know we're pushing on that for this year. I want to address the cost difference and the spread there. The interior stuff we can definitely do this year, and I think we'll get a lot of that exterior stuff too if we remove, $90,000 for replacing all the siding. I don't think we need to replace all the siding. So there's some big ticket items I don't think we need to do. We can save some money. So that's my report, and it's 9:17.
Look at that, great work. Councilor Andrade?
Two things. One, I'm assuming that there's a typo for the stone veneer option and that it's 17,000?
No, it's 707.
Or it was either that or 7,000. And so, but 17 sounds closer to the 20,000 range.
Yeah, delete the first 7. I think it was a typo on that.
Too bad it's not 7,000. Anyway, and then the other thing was, is there a way to incorporate, like, if the council is interested, asking in the bid, I guess, for environmentally friendly, energy efficient kinds of
Building materials.
Yeah.
Most of that's required now by state law.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, for leads, they have to have some of that built into their development of any
Awesome.
kind, so we'll require those. I think part of the bid, we are gonna swap out all of our lights for LED lights on that side. They'll be similar to this, which are a little more energy efficient. All the lighting outside, some of it's upward facing, but it's like it's the building upward facing and everything else is downward. So yeah, no, we're taking a lot of that into consideration.
As well as the enclosing as well, that's gonna help with our energy retention. Yeah, we talked about that.
On that note of the outside lighting, just if there's a way that we can look into, I don't know all of the science about it yet, just because of, life. But just if there's ways to minimize light pollution, especially for like migrating birds and cats and stuff, I know that that's been a big topic of conversation.
I think all of the lighting that we chose is actually fairly minimal on that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Thanks.
Yeah, G. Christensen's done a nice job. I mean, they're
They're
experts.
very environmentally,
They're very
they're
cognizant of all
feeling
that.
that way for sure.
Awesome.
So, any other comments or questions? Seeing none, thank you. Now we will move on to H, reports of boards, commissions, committees, council liaisons, and staff. I know Chris has been talking a lot. Maybe any 3 or 4 highlights from the management report you want to make sure you draw our attention to, or?
I'm gonna let Chelsea pick those out.
Oh.
Wow, okay.
Put her on the spot.
Well, the website, beta site is out, which is really exciting. Crystal and I just got access and we're working through a lot of hiccups, and then we're gonna bring other stuff in and also look at beta stuff. Really excited. Looks good, lots to still do and get fixed up. And let's see, what else do we have? Oh, it looks like Chris attended the real meeting with OSU LBCC coordination. And you're talking about getting a part-time director for that, which would really help our efforts as well. So I think that's an important thing that Chris is trying to work on with real. Would give us potentially some more staff availability from them to assist our small community. Spring Park still going strong. So what do you have here? Features expected to arrive in mid-March. And then I'll just point out that I like to say this in the meeting, but we're about to start recruiting for seasonals, which seems really early. And we're also going to be looking at how to get the flower baskets downtown watered. So maybe looking for some volunteers / really part-time position during the week. So if you know anyone who wants a really part-time position, watering flower baskets, keep an eye out and let them know. And that I did go to the CIS conference, annual conference, and had a lot of good information on risk, liability, benefits, all the things. So that's an important conference for us to have attended that. Police training, you're going to hear more about that, I think, in the upcoming budget. They're working on that. They did the Seafood and Wine Festival. Hopefully you saw some of the social media posts. They did a great job posting on social media about that effort with some other agencies that are around us.
Really want to give a shout out to Sergeant Bowers on that. I
So
mean,
well.
we didn't participate, we took the lead, we organized it, we coordinated, we invited and led that effort through Philomath. It does have a direct impact on us because everybody's passing through here. Great collaboration. Chief Gursky, highly supported it, was here, participated. So that was a huge multi-day, I think you listed everything, a multi-agency effort to really crack down on DUIs after that event, and it was good. We got several people off the street that shouldn't have been driving, so.
Absolutely.
Not to make it about me, but I did tag along with Sergeant Bowers for the entire evening on Friday night. And it was very cool to see that I had no idea this was like a thing that A, we were doing, and B, that he was in charge of. I just happened to email Chief Gursky like on Wednesday being like, hey, can I do a ride along sometime? He's like, how about Friday? And yeah, it was really cool to see. And it was good to see the cooperation. And I think one thing I really appreciated was the attitude of all the law enforcement agencies of just wanting to get people home safely. So, you know, sometimes that means giving a citation or taking someone to jail. But more often it just means, you know, giving someone a ride home or calling another driver or something like that. So I just appreciated that focus, but I'm gonna be quiet now.
Okay, and Public Works still going on with their contracted sewer and water projects. I don't want to forget about Public Works, and they are working really hard on getting the brackets installed downtown so we can have some pretty things up in our downtown area. We're excited about it. So let's turn it over to the council.
Councilor Andrade?
I have a question. I don't know if you happen to know about Kevin's bullet point about the restorative work that needs to be done and stuff like that, and was curious how that might be affecting budgeting and whether we have funds for that.
The phrase catastrophic
Yeah.
failure to the roadway did also draw my
Yeah.
eye.
Making sure that, like, you
I
know,
was like,
we're
oh.
rearranging CIP projects accordingly and stuff.
We have drained the funds and there's more expenses coming, so. I think what we'll see Friday is a very thin CIP for the next 2 or 3 years as we work to build those funds up a little bit. We talked about a little bit with utility rates. We talked about the need for some longer term funds for when something like this happens. The project just gets a little more expensive and it's not even within the margins of your contingency, right? And so, we've got catastrophic failure in the road, but not catastrophic failure in the budget. But yeah, every dollar we spend on this is a dollar we can't spend somewhere else, right? So Kevin does a great job of staying on top of these. Great report to contractors and engineers and knows what's going on. So yes, it's a concern, but it's not anything we have to make any serious changes on.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments or questions about the management report? Okay.
Before we move on, I just want to mention.
You see that, thank you. Then you'll also see we have our financial report, which shows sort of our budget and expenses for where we are in the year. And then a big thanks to Councilor Salsa for sending over all these materials from your liaison roles. Wonderful. Are there any other reports or updates from councilors about representative and liaison assignments? I know we said we wanted to spend more time on this, and I do feel like Crystal will maybe shoot me if I go.
I've been double booked
Oh dang!
for my liaisonship with city meetings.
Okay.
I think it's gonna work out. I talked about it a little bit. Double booked in, but I don't have it in the report, and I'll leave it at that.
Okay. I'll just say from my end, I was supposed to go to a school board meeting last month, and it was on the snow day. The superintendent, but I think we're in a decent spot. Just went to the fire board meeting earlier today, and I've been talking with Chris about some of the issues they were raising around fire hydrant testing, so we're response back to them and work through that. And then I think the big thing is they're also really seriously starting their process to look at doing a local option levy. Something for us to keep in mind if we want to support that, or make sure that we don't put anything on the ballot that may conflict with that. I think they're really narrowing in on that. Those are my two more substantive reports, and then I'm supposed to go to some council of governments training next Monday, I think, but that's all that I've done with that. So, yes, Councilor Nielsen.
I'd like to make sure that Councillor Crocker, when she returns, she's a liaison for PCS, and there's much to report on the food drive.
Yes.
She was a major part of, so make sure that next month she gets a chance to
Yes, that would be wonderful.
share that.
Thank you.
Actually.
Great reminder. Anything else? Okay.
Just commend the mayor for the letters that have been
thank
kind of
you.
written on behalf. We've not taken a lot of time to script the policy, but we did talk about giving letters of approval for things that we've been talking about, and on all of those, talking through. So there's a great bill that comes through, and it looks like it makes a lot of sense, and the league's asking for our logo to put on a bill. I typically don't follow up with all of you to do that. I'm typically like, yeah, if the league's supporting it, it makes sense. I'm doing that without consulting you. I hope that's okay, and if there's ever a problem with that, let me know. Similar, I know with the mayor at the Capitol, he has a lot of opportunities where he can step into a committee or do that, and so I think just broad strokes, I think just not necessarily a report, but just a attaboy and keep it up kind of thing I think it's appreciated that we feel like our voice is being heard at the Capitol on these specific issues we've talked about. And again, not so much a report, but just I think the council all appreciate your efforts to make our voice heard, even if we don't officially go through and wordsmith your letters and all that stuff. I think we've got a lot of confidence in you to be able to provide that testimony on behalf of the city. So thank you.
I appreciate that. That actually does remind me, one other thing I should have said. It's not quite as substantive, but just this week, yes, today, HCR 16, which is the memorial resolution for Paul Jeffrey Cochran, I believe passed off of the House floor. And I testified in favor of that with Mayor Neiman last week, and Shane Fritz was there as well, the sister. So that's been a great one. It's not obviously sweeping policy change, but it's a meaningful one, and it's the first step to put up a memorial highway sign as well. So it still has to pass through the Senate, but I just wanted to give that update too. So, and there's a separate resolution about the Shipleys, I think. So I'm not sure of the status of that one. I think it's a separate type of resolution, but that's in the weeds. And it's also 9:30, so before Crystal throws something at me, if there's no further comments or questions, we've reached the end of our agenda, and I will put us into recess for 5 minutes. Does that work for everyone? And we will reconvene at 9:36 p.m.
settled or something, so I was like, got that one.
All right, we're good. Okay. Bringing us back from recess. The time is 9:37. We're all still here. But with that, we will be convening into executive session. Do I do the roll call before we read my statement or after? On the agenda, it's before, but we haven't actually entered executive session.
Roll call for
Executive session. I don't know, it's on my agenda.
I don't think we need it.
Yeah, I don't think that.
Never mind.
You might just mention to the public that we don't plan to take any action when we come back to
Right.
executive session.
Yeah. Okay. So with that, the Philomath City Council will now meet in executive session for the purpose of consulting legal counsel regarding current litigation or litigation likely to be filed, and to discuss performance evaluations of public officers and employees. The executive session is held pursuant to ORS 192.660H, which allows the council to meet in executive session to conduct these discussions. Designated staff, the news media, or other designated persons shall be allowed to attend the executive session. All other members of the audience are asked to leave the room. No final discussion may be made in executive session. We will not return to open session at the end of executive session. Unless we need to adjourn. Okay, great. What?
We need a return to adjourn.
Okay, we will return for 2 seconds to adjourn, but we will not be making any decisions either in executive session or after. I would remind the council members and staff that the confidences in this executive session belong to the city council as a body and not to the individual members. These confidences should only be disclosed if the city council as a body approves such a disclosure. If a member or staff person does not believe that they can maintain these confidences, then I would invite that member or staff person not to participate in the executive session. Are there any questions? Okay, then with that, we will watch as the whole crowd